Hey, Craig, welcome aboard.
Hey, Fatty, how are ya?
I'm good. Craig, have we introduced you to this group before, or do you want us to quickly introduce you?
This is the first time I've been on, so
Okay.
I mean, other than listening, so I'm
Okay.
happy to.
Well, maybe we'll embarrass you and have
Okay.
you introduce yourself to everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
And can I ask, somebody just joined, it looks like via phone only from a 570 area code. Do you mind sharing with me who that is?
It's a spy.
Tiana, I just joined in case you don't recognize me.
It's been forever, John. I'm glad you introduced yourself.
I am one known that people would prefer to forget, but I'm here anyway.
You keep saying that, and you know that is not true. Hey, Fatty, we do have a couple folks joining over the phone, but I'm not sure who they are.
We'll put them on the spot and ask them to introduce themselves. So.
Well, and they're muted, so I'm hoping they will unmute themselves then.
Okay. Hey, Joan, do you have John on the agenda today?
No, I do not.
Patty, hi, it's Pat Breyer.
Hey, Pat. So we have Pat and John with us. What we want to give, do you mind? I'm going to invade your agenda for a few minutes.
Okay.
Give us a chance to introduce them and why they are on this call with us. So,
Okay.
and I'm assuming the 570 is Pat Breyer. The 412.
That's right, Patty.
And we have the 412 number is somebody who ran away from
Kim.
Pittsburgh. Hey, Kim.
Kim, yeah, thanks.
Okay. All right. Who else are we expecting today, Tiana?
Let me see here. So based on our list, it looks like Charlie was going to join us. Beth's here, Warren's here. It looks like Janine was going to join us. Adakin, and of course, everybody else I believe is here.
Excellent. Well, why don't we start with a couple of introductions while we're waiting for others? First of all, I want to welcome Craig Douglas. He's one of the new leadership team members at Mainstay. So Craig, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then we can go around and have everybody else say hi to you.
Okay. So I think I'm off mute now. So hi, my name is Craig Douglas. I am currently serving as the Chief Program Officer at Mainstay. I just started on May 3rd, but in a prior life, I served as the Chief Operating Officer at Pittsburgh Mercy, so a large behavioral health, intellectual disability provider in Southwestern Pennsylvania. And I had been at that organization through progressive promotions or progressive levels of responsibility since 1999. So I spent a lot of time kind of growing up in that organization. In addition, I do have a consulting practice, or I did, where I focused on compliance and risk management services. So largely mid-level, mid-size organizations, helping them set up sort of compliance, the traditional compliance programs, the 8 elements of compliance, risk management, things like that. So super excited to be here. I do have enough information to be dangerous about managed care and value-based reimbursement. Our CEO at Pittsburgh Mercy, if you some of you may have met him. Tony Beltrain is sort of kind of an expert in this area around value-based reimbursement. So I got to be an intern of his for a while. So glad to be here.
We're glad to have you with us, Craig. And Craig and I had the good fortune of working together on a couple of things when he was filling in for Pat D'Amico at TPA, and I got to see him do his magic in some amazing ways. So it's great. Good to have you with us, and welcome aboard. And so why don't we, Beth had to step away for a second. Oren, do you want to say hi? You're usually very shy.
Yeah, right. That's definitely not me. So I think everyone on the call, except for maybe John, knows who I am. So Oren Kern, Chief Administrative Officer at LifeSteps. Been with LifeSteps for just over 7 years now. Started at LifeSteps as their Chief Financial Officer. So I have pretty wide range of knowledge in the field: mergers, acquisitions, compliance, HR, fiscal. I've done most of it at this point. So
Welcome
anyway,
back.
yeah, thanks. Welcome back. Yeah, appreciate it, Patty. And you're looking tanner.
I'm looking tanner. I'm already in my 4th of July mode. We're down at our shore place. So
Yeah, good for you.
yeah. Cynthia.
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm Cynthia C. Miller. I'm the Senior Director of IDD Programs for PA Health Management.
Great. Welcome back. And Kim, you know everybody, don't you?
I do. I'm Kim Sonnenfeld with Mainstay Life Services, and I'm the CEO, and I've been there about 2.5 years. Sorry, I'm driving through West Virginia, so I'm trying to do a double stick here. So.
All right. And is Beth back? Yes.
I'm back. Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Beth Caraccio. I'm the Vice President for IDD Organizational Development for Meraki.
Wonderful. And you guys know us, the staff here to support you. We have Tiana, Joan, and Carol who's with us. Hi, Carol, and myself. And we have 2 guests today that I want to introduce you to. Some of you may know them, and give you context before I let them tell you a little bit about themselves. John Evans and Pat Pryor, both of whom have been working with RCPA and Novotel and a million different wonderful things that they do. I've asked them to join us because of our interest in discussing the tele-delivery of services and remote services for the IDD population as part of what we do for ProVantaCare. So John, you want to go first, and then I'll turn it over to Pat, and then if you would just, we're gonna let you guys be the first item on the agenda to let you introduce Novotel and some of what you do, and have the group interact with you. Because from a context perspective, we had identified telehealth as being one of the big opportunities. And frankly, 2 big things have happened since our conversation. The first one is the American Rescue Plan has come out, lending a lot of credence both in where the money could come from to support building out such a capacity. But also the American Rescue Plan came out that says telehealth is one of the areas that they would like to see built out. So I'm going to turn it over to you, John and Pat, and let you, carry out the next few minutes and then have some conversation with the team.
Sure. Thank you, Patty. And it's nice to be here. I apologize. I literally have spent the last week between New York City and Seattle meeting with various investors. So I'm still trying to figure out what time zone I'm in today, as I just flew in late last night. But so I apologize for the casual dress, and my medicine cabinet here is behind me as well. So Tiana will tell you, I'm a refugee from RCPA. I've spent a lot of wonderful years there working with colleagues. Really was a great part of my career. And now 7 years ago now, left Safe Harbor Behavioral Health, where I was the founding CEO and had the unique opportunity to be the founding CEO and majority investor in a Novotel telepsychiatry, where we really were wanting to solve the continual problem that we experienced at Safe Harbor of how do you recruit and retain top level clinicians. It was a constant challenge for us for the 20 plus years I ran that clinic, and all the clinics we interact with nationally at this point continue to have the same dilemma, which is actually growing based on, as I'm sure you all know, the supply demand dilemma. We're now in 27 states. We have a unique partnership with the National Council on Behavioral Healthcare. Gosh, Tian, I can't remember their new name now, but to me, it's always the NCCBH. National Council on Mental Wellness, I think is their new name. In any regard, we have a relationship with them. Both the immediate past president and current president have board seats with us. Linda Rosenberg and Chuck Ingolia, and Patrick Kennedy is also a partner. And our goal is really quite simple. It's timely access to care, wherever door that's needed. We know from our own experience and from a great deal of redundant research that when you achieve timely access to care to good clinicians, the path to the triple aim is really quickly at hand. So patient satisfaction, better clinical outcomes, and overall reduced costs. We know that happens. And so that mission from Safe Harbor, which we did that there, has not changed nationally. Our goal, quite frankly, Fadi, as you mentioned, the legislation is quite helpful, but we're really hopefully quite soon not to need the term telehealth. It's just health. We're just providing high quality health care at the standard of care via a platform that makes it more accessible. That's a real broad overview. Happy to chat and answer questions. And otherwise, happy to be here. Oh, Fadi, I'd add one other thing.
Okay.
I have this. I may or may not be helpful because I have the maybe unenviable resume of going head to head with payers. I make no apology for that. I feel that providers have been systematically underfunded for decades, and I will fight tooth and nail for a sustainable rate for any service that's offered by any provider. And I make no apology.
We can take people out of being advocate positions, but you cannot take the advocates out of you. So we're glad to have that in you. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
And Pat, did you want to? Pat is the instigator of behind all this. like all good lawyers, he cannot let a stone go unturned. So Pat, you want to introduce yourself to the crew who doesn't know you and why you're interested in telehealth?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry, I'm calling in from the car. I'm on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, so hopefully I'll get this out before I hit a dead spot. So my background, I've been doing a lot of work with my partner Paul Dugalecki with our CPA, and in addition to the it's kind of falling in under the wonderful leadership of Richard and the whole group. One of the things that we started to take a hard look at in the last couple of years through Jim Sharp and other leaderships, and particularly Jack Phillips, is really the expansion of telehealth and how COVID and how the whole pandemic or the pandemic has affected rates and payers and everything. So that led us, by way of Jack Phillips, to John's company, to Novotel, and it didn't take long to really identify that he has really starting a long time ago, really identified what is something that's extraordinarily needed, especially in rural areas, which is the delivery of psychiatric help, not psychology, but psychiatric help around the state. And now, as you mentioned, I think you said 22 states. So the magic of what John has done, which started off from a SAMHSA grant, I believe, is that he's identified where this type of care, which provides better care at better prices, and it fills an enormous backlog need from schools to corrections to a lot of other races, reduces backlogs, reduces costs. So he's in a lot of states, and some states are really, really progressive with telehealth regulations. Pennsylvania is not among them, but there are states like Minnesota and Kansas that are. So our advantage of getting to work with John is to really learn from his template, but also when I had a chance to talk to Fatty about this, I thought this is really something that, I know John has been, approached by, financial organizations from all over the country to kind of weigh in. And so what he built is extraordinary. So from my standpoint and through Jack Phillips and RCPA, it's just a pleasure to get to know him and to talk about maybe future opportunities.
Thank you very much, Pat. And so when we talked with Pat and John in earlier conversations, it seemed that the most appropriate partnership would be the continued relationship between Innovatel and RCPA, because there's a whole bunch of behavioral health providers who could benefit from that. And we did not think ProVantaCare would have any real added value that other than being an intermediary and making the product, the services cost a few cents more. So instead, what I've invited John and Pat to join us today for was primarily to have a conversation about, so what about the IDD world, where Innovatel today does not have a product that is specifically designed around the services of the IDD community. And we don't know whether there is such a product other than, a telephone or a Zoom call, but, wanted to really create a discourse as a first step to hear from both the providers around the table, as well as questions that we could ask John and Pat, so that we could come back and say, hey, yes, there might be an R&D project that ProVantaCare can facilitate and be of added value to the community we serve. So with that, John, I don't know if you want to start by asking some of your basic questions about the services and the areas, or if somebody around the table would like to kick it off with some ideas. I know Kim and others have done some work in this area, so I don't know if you want to chime in at this stage.
Well, yeah, I can just comment quickly. I see Charlie. Nice to see you again for a minute there anyway. So know Charlie well, and the pretty services that BNI has provided, both not just in Erie but statewide. There's always been a need for psychiatric partnership with ID services. That's unquestionable. I think they've been given not enough attention as they deserve. And mental health providers are always pushing to get more clinicians in their clinics. So but with that said, I've been away from kind of the community-based services for 7 years now, so I don't know if that's changed incrementally or not. So I would leave it. That's a question I guess I would ask all of you. And Craig, I wanted to mention, I know Mercy well. They've done a historically fantastic job in Pittsburgh. So really a very credible provider agency there as well.
So I guess I would start out by asking the providers, is this an area that you think we need to, that we could consider for a collaboration with John and his team, specifically around option number one is bringing in psychiatric services to the IDD consumers that you guys support, or option number two, and this is probably my greater area of interest, is there a delivery system that would help support individuals with IDD to that would benefit from the telehealth platforms that Innovatel has developed? All the shy ones around the room, is a good time to speak up. No?
I'll jump in real quick. I think on the level of psychiatry, I think that's always a need with IDD. We struggle with finding supports for our population, and psychiatrists that understand individuals or even want to treat individuals with IDD and co-occurring mental health issues. So I certainly think that that is definitely something that would be of interest, at least for us and within Meraki. And then the opportunity to do that through telehealth is also something of interest, right? Because then that would expand our who we can use and where. So absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Beth.
I know in Erie it's always worked well. I think John's group started doing it actually with children in the schools years ago, and that really was a big boost for our kids system here in Erie. So, and he's continued, he's done some into our jail, things of that nature. So that, there's just a lot of different areas where it really comes into play and has a very positive impact.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. This is anecdotally, but I think it might be more core to your services. And I'd love to get some grant funding, but our psychiatrists tell us those who have treated children on the spectrum in person in the room and then on screen, they are absolutely convinced that in general, children on the spectrum are more engaged with their clinician on screen than when they're in the same room. And it really kind of comports to a lot of the research done with computer games and robotics with autistic children, that they have a better comfort level. I'd love to find some research money to really prove that theory that it might be a superior level of care than the traditional model. We've also had anecdotal experience in anger management groups that our patients tell us that they're more comfortable having those difficult conversations with their clinician on screen than in the room, that it's a little less provocative for them and feel that they can maintain control better. So we're starting to learn, at least on individual interactions, that this might be a superior modality in some diagnostic areas.
So I can sort of speak a little bit as the new guy at Mainstay. We have not used the telepsych so much for psychiatry, but we are using Station MD, which is sort of like a physical health or triage for emergency rooms or urgent care replacement. And it's been pretty remarkable in the few cases that we have used in improving, you talk about the client, the patient experience, in improving the experience of care, in not traumatizing an individual, having taken them to the ER unnecessarily, and getting them, even if you do have to take them to the ER, part of the value of what Station MD offers is sort of I guess the best you could describe it is sort of the fast pass, like when you're in the airport. The Station MD does kind of a connection between the ER that the person is headed to, so that when they get there, there's not long wait times. They're in and out as quickly as possible, and they're briefed on what the issue is that's bringing them in. So I think that's been a pretty powerful tool. We're working to sort of scale that. I think that's going to be a pretty you will see a lot of hopefully unnecessary ER visits, reductions in unnecessary ER visits, and then also the improvement in the person's experience of that. On the telehealth side for psychiatry, my only experience there has really been with Iris Telehealth, and similar to what John was just saying, we implemented it at Mercy mainly for the child and adolescent, because it was impossible to get a child psychiatrist. I mean, there's no way that you could afford that in the community mental health system. And it was a very similar experience. The kids and families really interfaced really well with the technology. I think that we're also seeing that a lot with Station MD, that our person served here at Mainstay are interfacing really well with the technology, which is generally kind of the biggest barrier. It's sort of the difference between staff and the person's experience of care and their inability to kind of navigate the technology, but that doesn't really play out the way most people think it would. So
telepsychiatry piece seems to be pretty self-evident. And again, unless something has changed dramatically, I think other than providing, refreshing everybody's mind about the access to the telepsychiatry services that John has available, I don't know whether ProVantaCare adds value at this stage. So in that sense, I'm glad to continue to circulate and provide the exposure to John's services. He's a member of our CPA and a supportive, very supportive member. So in that sense, I would want to continue to do that. But in the for the IDD side in particular, is there a lane or an avenue that we as a company want to explore with John and Pat that might be even that we could sketch out requests for grants and proposals to go after some of the American Rescue Plan monies that are out there, that we can be part of a demonstration program to to carry out the delivery of some of these services remotely, because I know they've been used in employment to a limited degree, but not in terms of the additional psychology services or other support services.
If it helps, Hadi, we didn't, it's a little bit different configuration, but we did participate in a grant submission with another state. And real pleased we did win the RFP on the entire state of Vermont's court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. So all the evaluations that are ordered through the courts in Vermont come to our forensic team. They have a real efficient way of turning that, the question around guilty but mentally ill, competency at trial, all of that. The judges are, of course, thrilled with it because they don't have to wait eons for a forensically boarded psychiatrist to do that. We've got a whole panel of them. So it is doable depending on the requirements of the grant, of course. Sometimes because we're a private for-profit company and there are some restrictions on some grants of our participation, but if it's within the confines of the grant, we can certainly, look into that.
No, and so are we. We're a private for-profit company as well. So, it's an interesting time to test the limits of what the state wants to fund to do some breakthroughs. So if there is any, why don't, rather than take up more of your time at this stage, John and Pat, if I may, it sounds like this group needs a little bit more prodding to come up with some more specifics of where we want to go. But I appreciate the fact that you made the time to be with us today. And we will probably want to learn more about the Innovatel platform itself, so we can see where the analogies might be for us to try to leverage them in the IDD side.
Sure. No, happy to participate, and I'll just wait to hear back from you then.
Well, it won't be long, so we'll reach out to you very quickly. So.
And Charlie, nice to see you, even though we're neighbors. I haven't seen you. You look much younger, I might add.
You've been hiding. I haven't found you. We'll have to go to lunch.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Patty. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Joan, are you still on? Can I turn it back over to you?
I am. That was very interesting. Thank you for starting us out with that. So while the group has some work to do to follow up on that information, I made a note that we may want to make sure we reference that part of people's care needs when we do the paper, to reference the use of it and what has emerged from having used it during the pandemic, And it ties into a conversation that we had before about piloting and, doing, research and grants to support providers trying new things. So those things all tie in.
Before you thought, just for the benefit of the group, my plan is I'm in the process of drafting a ProVantaCare response to the public comment period for the American Rescue Plan dollars that the state uh, is saying they want to make available. I welcome your input. That is due by the 30th. So I'm putting together a laundry list like says, give me all your money, give me all your money now, because we are going to, we have the best ways to use it. But there's plenty of this money. So I think if we propose some pilots around telehealth as well as some of the IDD areas that are that intersect with CHC, and I know Joan's going to speak about that in a minute. We might find some receptive sources of funding to help bridge the next 3 years when the state has close to $10 billion that they would like to spend on HCBS. So, Joan, back to you.
Okay, so I want to do two things today, and if we run out of time, we will simply push off to the next meeting the discussion around supports coordination that we did not get to before. The more important topic for today is discussion and review of the Health Management Associates presentation that was done last Tuesday at the it preceded the ProVantaCare board meeting. And you have received the slides from that presentation. And there are a number of things in that presentation that bear some discussion today before we dive back into where we were with developing our position paper. So Fatty, I'm gonna let you kick that off because you had made some observations that I agreed with, and then a few things that we just want to kind of walk some folks through that stood out to us in what we heard from the three presenters.
Thanks, Joan. There were 3 areas that I thought were worth noting to the group. The presentation that Sharon Lewis made was a very interesting perspective on the state of moving towards managed care on a national basis. And my Cliff Notes version of what she said is that this is an area that has been of great interest in the past. There were mixed reviews in the level of success of being able to implement IDD managed care in a number of states. And her indication was that the momentum that had been picking up for IDD managed care has significantly slowed down to the point that a few folks who were on the call were texting me and sending me emails saying, so you see, we don't have to worry about IDD managed care anymore, which was a very surprising conclusion that we would reach, but just given what we know. And we had a follow-up meeting with the HMA folks, Joan and I did on Friday. There were some of the leadership folks, including Kevin Hancock from the Office of Long-Term Living, recently left DHS, as some of you know, and he says, keep in mind that that is the desired conclusion that folks from the status quo would like to reach. That is not necessarily the politically realistic place where where managed care IDD is. And I actually wrote a quote from him that says that if nothing else, your team, your group should not take their eye off the ball and continue the readiness for it, because while this administration may not have the the desire to push through a position paper or a conversion to managed care IDD, there is a high likelihood that even a Democratic follow-up administration would see this as low-hanging fruit. So do not dissuade yourself by thinking that this is going to go away. And I don't know, some of you were on this call, and I would appreciate your input on it, if it's any different. Well, so that was the one thing, is that, so I, they basically, the management team from HMA was like, don't take it as they get your hand, get your foot off the pedal on that. Keep, make sure that you continue the readiness piece. The second observation from the meeting that was presented was the growing overlap between IDD consumers who are being enrolled in the community health choices waiver under the managed care MCOs. The current estimate is that it's 6,000 or more. That's 6,000 that anybody can truly identify, but that there may be a lot more consumers who are in that category. And one of the areas of opportunity that was presented that makes quite a bit of sense is the ability to provide a pilot program that is in collaboration with the CHC MCOs that demonstrates the type of services that are needed for these individuals, so that one of two things could happen. One is those additional services would be added to CHC. So a consumer who is enrolled in CHC would have, I'm sorry, community health choices, would have access to the appropriate services they need. Second is to inform DHS and ODP about the ability to support a truly rebalanced community for the in the IDD side. And so the opportunity for us as ProVantaCare in particular to approach the state with that kind of a pilot, and it's going to be an interesting conversation whether the state punts us back to the MCOs or the state says, I will help fund and support a pilot for these type of services. The American Rescue Plan dollars make that kind of a pilot investment very feasible. And the third area was in the ability of demonstrating paths to rebalancing in the IDD waiver area. And that is, as many of you know, because of the current platforms, we have about 80% of the dollars are being expended on in a residential or group home setting, and I'm sorry, in the consolidated waiver, are being spent in a group home setting. So there was some there's an opportunity for us to help demonstrate with the use of some of these bridge monies, which are set to expire in 3 years, the ability to create a rebalancing environment within the IDD population, which has to deal with the a significant portion of its dollars being spent in residential setting. And finally, the fourth area that was presented was around autism and the ability of a ProVantaCare group of providers to come together and propose ways that the autism waiver, which is currently a very narrow definition and has a very small gate to get in for adults, can be demonstrated to be a broader platform. So those related to the IDD area, these were the four areas the four opportunities that were presented. Joan, did you want to add anything to that, or do you want to take some time to have a conversation about these four?
I think we should discuss those and let people weigh in with their observations or even questions if something was mentioned that you wanted to follow up, with, what was that? How can we get more detail about that idea that was put forward? So I'd like to open it up to the group to share what you heard and saw on that presentation.
I don't think our group got their coffee this morning.
They're unusually quiet. Not sure what's going on. So I did want to add that also swirling around as we look at the use of the American Rescue Plan money and the things that the state has said they want to do in their preliminary information, the information they put out that they want response back to them, and the comments are due to them by close of business on July 6th. So you get a whole nother week, Patty, to work on that. July 6th. So one of them is increasing access to HCBS, but we don't really know exactly what that means. But we have also heard parallel conversations about doing something about the lack of housing options and doing some innovative approaches to get people housed in the community. So I wanted to add that as well, because we've heard that in many different contexts, that part of the problem is that housing component.
This is Carol. I was unable to be on that call. I had a conflict the day that this meeting was, but when you talk about rebalancing the residential and the amount of people living in group homes, can you just explain a little bit more about what they mean with that? I mean, I know there's this big push right now that there are people that are living in group homes we think can be living in a less supervised setting with additional technology and other types of supports. But anyone who's worked with people with IDD knows that there's a certain population that's always going to need that 24/7 in-person care. And so I'm just kind of trying to wrap my mind around what does this mean by rebalancing?
The only place where we have observed rebalancing has been on the OLTL side in shifting the number of individuals and dollars that were being expended in a skilled nursing facility to a more community-based residential setting. And so we have, in the past 4 years of community health choices, seen the number of consumers who were being served in the community go up from 55% to 72%. And with that, then, even now, keep in mind that in CHC, all consumers are NFCE, they're nursing facility clinically eligible. So that's a first cutting, so putting someone outside a nursing facility is in and of itself a depart why the waiver exists, right? So that's, so the state as well as across the country has seen that there is a pathway to expending those dollars on services in the community rather than in a 24/7 supervised residential setting. Now, the continuum is not nearly as wide as it is in the IDD community when it comes to CHC. Because, like, for example, while assisted living is technically available in CHC, it is probably one of the least served settings in the waiver. And I think there's a desire to see alternatives along the continuum, the life sharing alternative, the supported living alternatives, as opposed to the traditional residential 24/7 supervised settings. And so, and the use of technology is being touted as a possibility, but I don't think anybody has the answer today, Carol.
Yeah, I'll give a little bit of my thought or feedback if that's what you're looking for.
Please.
So I think Fatty gave a good overview of what we saw with OLTL. I guess my viewpoint there, or my comments would be that that model is quite different, right? It's primarily, not all, but primarily physical disabilities. So it was a little bit easier to work with a managed care organization to put together proper supports to get people out of nursing facilities, right? They're more costly, just like a state center would be for like the IDD world. The only one thing I would like to comment is, I think we as a group need to figure out how to word it differently to say in IDD that we're not community service based is, I don't know, folks, I'll just say it. I know we're recorded, so I might live to regret this, but it's kind of a slap in the face. We are community based. State centers are not. Let's be frank there. 2380s, 2390s, 6400s, you don't get more community based than that. That was the whole purpose of them back in the 70s when people fought to get people out of state centers. So I just think as a coalition, we kind of owe it to, and Fatty, I know that you're a huge supporter of this as an advocate over the years, but we got to figure out a better way to word it, I think. Now, what I think with rebalancing in the IDD sector is this, and I could be completely wrong. I hope I am in a way, I guess. But when I hear rebalancing, all I hear is 6,400 money being reduced and money going to supported living and life sharing. Look, folks, there's a reason why those services are not used highly. They're a great model. They work for a certain percentage of the IDD population. But every time I've ever been involved with it, it's not largely supported because it is not funded well. So for life sharing, for example, those families, the reimbursement for life sharing is 1/3 what it is in a residential setting. But those families still have to meet all the same licensing regulations as a 6,400 home. That's very tough to do when you work 40 hours a week. Supported living, I don't have as much experience in, but from what I understand, it's roughly the same. So that's what I hear when I hear rebalancing. I could be completely off base, but that's what I hear, Carol.
Well, Oren, you expressed my thoughts exactly. And as a former residential provider, I can tell you life sharing is extremely difficult we think we have staffing shortages. To find a family that is willing to take on that responsibility for 24/7, 365 days a year. And yes, we build in respite for those families, but there are not families knocking the doors down wanting to do this. Now, since the time that I was doing it, they're now allowing natural families to be paid for doing that service. But for people to think that that's going to expand in this tremendously large way, they're fooling themselves, because that has been a goal of the Office of Developmental Programs for probably the last 20 years,
Right.
you know, or longer. And supported living arrangements, unless ODP changes their rules and the way that their service definitions, frankly, I supported people in apartments, in a clustered building. I supported people living all throughout the community, but then also we had some programs where people could live in their own apartment, but they needed that security of knowing staff was there if they needed them, you know, handling a minor fire, like they're cooking and, you know, something happens. Knowing that there's a staff member, and this also, by the way, was a great way to get families to agree to allow their family member to move from the security of a group home to an apartment setting. So we would have like 4 apartments in the same building, and staff would be in another apartment. So there'd be 5 apartments in the building. But ODP changed the service definition. Well, when they created service definitions, they made it nearly impossible to fund those, because you can, to live in an independent, I think it's 30 hours or less of supports a week. So you have to be really very skilled and able to handle, and there's a question out there now about some of the technology supports. Will those count towards the 30 hours of supports per week, per apartment, by the way? So if you had 2 people living together in an apartment, they could get 30 hours of support a week, period. Or then you had to be a licensed facility.
Right. And Carol, I will say the last provider I worked at, Weiblinger's Residential Care, we had one individual of I think we were at 35 when I left there, but we did serve one person in semi-independent, the model that you just described. And again, it's like those, I think we need to be frank here again. And I don't ever like holding people down or, you know, saying a person can't do something, but I do think that, at least in my experience in the field, and probably the shortest of everyone that's on the call, you know, just to be realistic, I do think that we're talking about a smaller portion of the population that we serve. But the model worked. That model for WRC, we made money every year on it. And this is back in the cost report eras when, you know, money was, you know, even tighter than it is in now with the acuity-based rates. Again, I'm all for it, but like not too long back, how long was it, Carol? I think you were on the call. It was a TPA call, and Rick Smith had said that they're going to work on moving the autism waiver rates in line with ODP. And I remember hearing that, like thinking like, that's great, you know, because the autism waiver is another thing they've been pushing for a lot of years, but the rates have always been terrible. So when you're, for example, serving a person in a day program that's funded by the autism waiver, say in supported employment, it's really like we have to, as providers, we have to play this balance game of like not turning people away, but keep enough where we have ODP funded people to kind of float the deficit. And I couldn't help but think like, well, that's great, but where's the money coming from? And again, it went back to my rebalancing thoughts. I mean, I've just seen over the years, every time, and I think everyone that's on this call knows, you know, I used to work for the funders, and every time they talk about that, it's just moving money from one bucket to the other.
Right.
So those are my thoughts. Thanks for letting me share. And Fatty, the reason why I didn't respond on the HMA presentation, it's 52 pages long. I didn't get it till this morning. Just haven't had a chance to read it.
You haven't memorized it yet?
Not yet, but you give me another couple days, I could maybe memorize the page that says Kevin Hancock on it.
Well, no, and by the way, we wanted to recirculate that, and this is more than one-time conversation, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, but you know, the opportunity with the American Rescue Plan dollars presents a unique time where as a group we have the opportunity to really go after some ideas. They're not going to be full-blown proposals. These are going to be like short two-line snippets that says, we think you should consider, we see the opportunities for, rather than full-blown proposals. And because they're gonna come back and say, you know, we're like, for example, I was surprised that they were as specific on some of the nurse shadowing ideas that they had there. And one area that I didn't bring up, but that we see that they're asking for input on, is what do we do about workforce creativity issues? You know, do we create levels of credentialing? Do we create new training? Do we create, you know, are there things that we can propose there? And I know there are a lot of organizations that are already pouncing on that. So there will be things around workforce development. But back to the HMA presentation, I think the biggest point that I wanted to make sure we as a group did not take away is this thing is going to be gone. Don't worry about managed care, it will be gone. I think that would be not just from a Fatty perspective, but from others who participated in conversations, that would not be a good conclusion to reach. So if you disagree with that, if you listen to the presentation or review this further and you want to disagree with that direction, please speak up, because you know, we all hear what we want to hear sometimes.
And Fatty, help me understand, because I'm a little shocked that people would be saying that for IDD. I mean, maybe it's not happening tomorrow, but it's short. The writing's on the wall, and you're saying that influencers at this Health Management Associates panel discussion were saying that.
Yeah, there were the key presenter for the IDD segment, Sharon Lewis, presented a case for a waning level of interest. Is it maybe the mild way I could put it? She didn't say don't do anything or it's going to go away, but she presented a pretty well thought out case for a waning level of interest in managed care. Joan, you were on, and I know a couple of others may have been on too. Did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, my takeaway was really more that she was showing over time and across states and populations that the pace of the trend toward new managed care inclusion of intellectual disability or developmental disability services was not as quick a pace as just several years ago people thought would be happening. So the reasons are many and different state by state, but I think it really spoke to more of a matter of You know, is it imminent? Is it urgent? You know, is it right around the corner? You know, is the head of steam really building up across the country? And it's not, but according to the folks we spoke with at HMA to kind of unpack that a little bit, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And some of the observations that looking at what has happened with including intellectual disability and developmental disability into their managed care systems is that it's not clear that there's outcomes that have made it worth the work, both in, you know, outcomes for the individual, the system, or cost. You know, it may not be, you know, as good a fit as they've seen with the physical disability and senior population because of the nursing home tie-in to that group. However, the decision, you know, I hate to be this blunt, but the decision to do it or not do it really isn't hinged only on, is it the best model for the individual? That's probably not the deciding factor. It's more political, it's financial, it's you know, policy. Is there a champion to do it in the state or a champion fighting against it in the state? So those are the factors that I think we need to continue to look at and include in our discussions here for Pennsylvania. So I wanted to add one more thing about the rebalancing question that Carol posed. Again, going back to some additional, we did some additional, you know, digging with the HMA folks. And some of the rebalancing assumptions have to do with the role of the ICFs. So in Pennsylvania, we do still have both public and private ICFs. So there is some opportunity in that level of the way care is provided to look at some rebalancing opportunities. What form that takes and whether it's doable politically, who knows? You know, we have all kinds of issues here in Pennsylvania with our ICFs. But I will also mention that when policymakers talk about rebalance, they are usually talking about money. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen states do, and Pennsylvania has done this as well, is narrow the pathway to get the 24/7 ongoing type of placement. And we see this with Pennsylvania's constricting their consolidated waiver to only 100 new slots per year, and a pretty high bar to get into that program. And their new waiver that will be where the growth occurs does not have that option in it. We've also seen in another state, Fatty and I have worked with Tennessee, for example, their policymakers shut the front door to those services and define some narrow exceptions to get into those services. So the other approach is diversion, that if a person presents with that need, they first, before placement at that level of care, look at other community-based options short of the 24/7 first, and that's required, that exercise is done first. So there are some iterations of how rebalancing happens that we can incorporate in our discussions and, you know, perhaps propose trying some on a limited basis.
But for benefit of the group, we are not going out there to say we think that you should rebalance the way the dollars are being spent in the IDD population served by displacing people from their current homes. And I know the sensitivity to that, and I'm personally very sensitive to it as well. But I think that we need to help the state also see the alternatives and identify and fund properly the alternatives that may be uh, available, whether it's from within the state today in the way private and public ICFs are being converted over time, to the addition of new options and the properly funding of alternatives. For example, you know, should we as a group propose that we would undertake a a demonstration during the next 2, 3 years that would enhance the rates for life sharing so that we can show that when it's properly paid for, that it would be able to attract sufficient uh, homes into the pool of available resources. I'm just throwing out that as an idea, but there's a lot of also value-based payment focused opportunities that the state is looking for. And even though IDD is not technically in a value-based payment track today, they are doing incentive payments for certain activities. And they have used the rates very aggressively to affect the CPS world, for example. So we can be, ProVantaCare can be that environment that helps demonstrate a better way to do it than wielding the machete that they did with the CPS rate. And I won't put it that way in writing, but there are potential opportunities here.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's also an opportunity, again, because of the time that we're in, to push for increased continuity and parity and consistency. So an obvious example is the autism rates. And you know, the corollary to that over at Office of Long-Term Living, many years ago, I'm going to say at least, probably 10 years ago, OLTL looked at the mess of their different services and waivers and, you know, provider qualifications and service definitions. And they were all over the place for basically the same thing, paid differently, defined differently, but basically for the same thing. They undertook an effort to make it consistent. So they did that, and then the rates became consistent. And there's no reason we can't ask ODP to do the same thing. That why you would pay for something differently simply because the person using that service has a different diagnosis than in another waiver, really makes no sense. So I think there's some low-hanging fruit we can weigh in on as well that certainly won't break anybody's bank. And even when the money from this particular opportunity dries up in 2024, it's not a huge burden for the state to continue that continuity.
Hey, Joan, we're losing a couple of folks as we're going. Seems like where they've got other conflicting meetings.
Okay.
Do you want to move on to the topic of anything related to the position paper, or do we want to take the rest of our time to try to flesh out some of these things that we're talking about now?
Well, let me do a real quick thing about the position paper, and then we can come back to this topic. So we'll put off the supports coordination discussion because that really needs its own, that's at least an hour there. And a couple of loops we're going to close from our previous discussion. We'll put them on the next call as well. But I wanted to just reference the timing of bringing this to some conclusion. We can talk and talk and talk for years, and there's good stuff to talk about, but we have to put some finality on it, some closure. And I'm going to suggest that we continue meeting twice a month and that we conclude it by September 13. So if we have an opportunity to have any discussion, even if it's informal, during the RCPA conference, for those of you who are going, obviously, if you're in ProVantaCare, you're also an RCPA member, that predates the conference, and that can be our target. How do folks feel about that? You're muted.
I think that's a very fair target, and you can keep us on track with that. My concern is we're heading into summer, and we're going to lose some people. And this position paper is one of the essential building blocks we need for the ProVantaCare strategic plan. So for those of you who are involved with the operations of ProVantaCare, the board has approved moving forward with the strategic planning process, and I think they expect some input from us no later than the end of the calendar year with a real plan forward and an interim report at that September meeting. So I think that's the latest from a timeline perspective.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So back to the conversation and the follow up to the HMA. If there's any additional thoughts or discussion.
So maybe one option, because folks may not have had the chance to fully review it, Joan, is when we send out the follow-up to today's meeting, that we have that as a recording, and if somebody was not able to listen to it, we can they might be able to just listen to the IDD portion, which is the last 45 minutes or so of that meeting. So maybe rather than uh, asking folks to just react to the Joan Fatty filter, we ask them to listen to it themselves, and we take the first half hour of our next meeting to try to close the loop on that, because from a timing standpoint, and time seems to be our greatest enemy and our greatest friend sometimes. If this response is due by July 6th, which happens to be a Tuesday, we do not currently have on the calendar another meeting scheduled. But the natural time would be for it to be on July 5th if anybody shows up. So Tiana, can you please coordinate with Allison to make sure we get that July forward schedule for the work groups on the calendar?
And I'm assuming we're going to start with the next week.
Yes. Well, so the next meeting would be on July 5th, and Joan, you'll be gone for that, won't you?
Right, that's a holiday. Everybody's off that day. That is the July 4th
Oh,
vacation.
That's
okay.
why I asked if you want us to start next week.
So I think it would be July 12 and 26,
Okay,
August 9 and 23, and then September 13th, which is 2 weeks before the RCPA conference.
okay.
And I'm not sure where that falls with the ProVantaCare board meeting. I don't have that one on my calendar.
I think it's right before the conference. So,
Okay.
okay. Does this sound like a pretty reasonable work plan for us as a group, or are you guys gonna all go on vacation on me and leave us hanging? Okay,
I'm okay with working with whoever's not on vacation that week, because it's gonna be a rolling thing.
yeah. All right. I think we've used up all the good thoughts we're gonna get out of these folks today. So why don't we plan to make our next meeting on July 12th, you said?
Mhm.
And we will, and Tiana, when you please coordinate with Allison, please remember the BH work group on the alternate weeks. So, all right. Well, hey folks, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. And I know this is a lot of hard conversation at times, but we'll get through it. We'll get done. And want to make sure we see this as an opportunity to draw some funds into ProVantaCare as by bringing some of these pilots forward. So as you're scratching your head is thinking about what might work for your organization, we'd appreciate you sharing those good ideas. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good day.